Hello.
Oh, that one's really loud. What the heck?
Testing, testing. Testing, testing. There we go. Now it's on. Hello and welcome. First, I'd like to introduce Jason Weimann. He is a Unity educator and longtime programmer. So let's give it up for Jason.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Jason, welcome to Tulsa and welcome to Atlas School. Can you share with us a little more detail on your background and what you're up to today?
No.
Okay.
No, sure. Yeah, so I've been making video games for 20-something years, probably longer than that, because I started when I was like 7 or 8 years old on my Commodore 64, when I ran out of games and you were at a command prompt and could just type in BASIC. So I started making terrible little games that I would try to convince my sister and mom to play and stuff. And then as I kind of grew up, I got into just general software development. So when I was a teenager, I stumbled on, I don't remember what it was, a C++ book that I grabbed at a bookstore, started playing around with it, and eventually got a job at Intel writing software for blade systems. So there was a portion in the middle where I went to college and got an electrical engineering degree and realized that the only part of it that I liked was the writing assembly code and machine language stuff. So after I graduated, I went over and started looking at software jobs. Got a job at Intel, working on blade servers and some of their new tech, which was awesome because you got to see like these new crazy CPUs that weren't coming out for like 5 to 10 years. They would give you the little experimental ones and stuff. But while I was working there, I was also a very hardcore video game addict, and I would play a lot of EverQuest and other things. One day I randomly logged into EverQuest 1, hadn't played in like 9 months or something, and a friend sent me a message and said, "Hey, I know you know how to code. Do you want to come work for me on this new game?" And I said, "Yes, let me go tell my wife." So it was actually a QA job, and it was a QA job doing tools for the QA department down at Sony. So I talked to the wife, told her, "Hey, we're moving to California. You can have another baby and quit working. I'm just going to work here." She just told Clarence this story yesterday, I think. So yeah, I moved down there, took the job there, started working at Sony, building some tools for the designers and the developers, and 3 weeks later got laid off and the company got acquired, and it was really interesting. It worked out really well for me because during the layoffs, while they were sending everybody out, they pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, we did this all before you got hired, but you've been kicking ass here for the last 3 weeks, so we're going to bring you on to the new place." It just took I waited like another month and then got the full-time job and went straight from QA into tools programming. So it was 3 weeks, got laid off, and then got a promotion, and they doubled my salary, which was great. And then from there, I was just stuck. I couldn't quit. So I started doing tool stuff, started making different things for our games, and then started getting into database development, eventually took over the databases for the games, and then started taking over gameplay stuff and all of that. Took over as a lead for a while, and yeah, it's been a fun experience. And then eventually I got tired of that. I was like 7-8 years working on MMOs. I left and went to work at a mobile company. It was right when the iPhone 1 came out. So we started making iPhone 1 games, iPad games, iPhone 3 games. None of them were successful, but we had lots of funding from a military contractor-based company. So yeah, it went on for quite a while. After that, I went over to Qualcomm, worked on a bunch of enterprise software. That was fun, but really, really boring. I think day one I fixed like 15 or 20 bugs because the code was so simple. One big difference to take away from this is most enterprise stuff is very easy compared to game stuff. Game stuff gets much more complicated. There's lots of things moving around. Most of the enterprise stuff that I've worked on is just reading, writing data, and then sending off some report type stuff. It's much simpler. So it's a long story. Anyway, went from there, worked at Qualcomm for a while, decided to leave there, and go make VR games. Made a bunch of VR games when the Vive came out, a couple launch titles for it. The baseball one was my favorite. It actually started as a tutorial. I was making a little YouTube tutorial on how to build a VR game, and my wife loved it, and she kept playing it, and I was like, this is weird, because my wife doesn't play video games, and she just wouldn't put the controller down and kept hitting the baseballs. I was like, all right, I'm going to try making this into a game. I spent the rest of the weekend, turned it into a game, and launched it as a launch title. The requirements were very low back then. All you had to do was have a game that worked, compiled, and was good. But it sold great, and ended up selling all those off. And now I just do YouTube stuff. So while I was doing that, I was also teaching a little bit online and doing a little bit of blogging, which came initially from me just wanting to document stuff for the company and for myself. So I write up blog posts about how all our stuff worked. Did some for VR stuff, and then slowly started doing just general Unity stuff, and for the last 8 years or so, just been making YouTube tutorials, teaching courses, and mostly teaching people how to make games and making games myself, and then occasionally doing some contracting and consulting to help people finish their games. So that's my very long, short intro.
Really, really interesting. So what, if there was something specific, sparked your interest in transitioning from traditional and enterprise software to game development? Was it a favorite game, a particular experience, or just the opportunity?
It was really the opportunity. So I'd always been interested in doing game development, but I had no idea how to get a game dev job, right? So when I was 19, 20, trying to figure this stuff out, I was looking around, and like, there weren't like lots of online resources or anything. You basically just had to look on Craigslist, was I think the best thing that you could get into, and try to find jobs. But I was always interested in game development. I'd gone to multiple interviews. So before I got this job, the one that my friend randomly called me about, I had actually applied there twice, gone to interview twice, flown down to Las Vegas and to San Diego and interviewed twice, not gotten the job. The first time, the guy that was going to hire me quit that week, like after we left the event where I got interviewed. So I was trying to figure out why he never called me. We're friends now, and I found out about that long after. And then the second one, I don't even remember why, but I ended up not getting it either time, and then randomly just got that offer, and I was like, hey, 2 weeks, we're moving to California from Washington, and it was always kind of a dream, though. I mean, from the time I was a kid, I just kind of wanted to make games. I just didn't realize that it was a thing that you could do as a job, or that it was even more fun than playing games.
That's awesome. So given you have quite a huge software experience for working with Qualcomm's enterprise software to all sorts of 2D, 3D, and VR games, can you identify some key differences between maybe what it's like working as a traditional software developer versus as a game developer?
Oh, definitely. There are some huge differences. First, like I mentioned, I think game development in general is harder. There are definitely some enterprise and technical coding things that are much harder than even game development. But your standard enterprise development stuff, like the things at Qualcomm, at Intel, if you're not doing the low-level programming on the actual devices, it's generally not that exciting or interesting. Like, it's cool because you're finding new ways to use the tech and to solve the problems, but the problems that you're solving aren't usually that exciting. It's like, hey, we need to keep track of how many things went from this spot to this spot, or we need to run this test and have this data go up. It's not the most fun and exhilarating. When you're working on games, like, you get to put in stuff, it's fun, you see the fun, and then you show it to people, and they smile. They're like excited about it. You go to meetups and events, and everybody's all like really pumped. They love the game. They really enjoy the thing that you're giving them. When you give them an enterprise update, you're just hoping that they don't complain about something. Like, the goal is like, hey, I'll give this to you. Please don't be mad about something else that might have happened along the way, or something that's not in there. It's almost never the thrill and excitement. And even as a game programmer, working with designers, you work with game designers a lot. You make stuff. They love it. They're super excited, and it's generally a very friendly, happy environment. That said, it's also a much more relaxed and chill environment. Like, at Qualcomm, everybody is buttoned up, slacks, and walking through the halls nice and proper. And then at Sony, they're smoking weed in the parking lot. So it's a very big difference. So you get a giant variety. So depends on what you like, but I really enjoy just seeing people really love the product and like the product, and not just it's a tool that they have to use to get things done so that they can go home at the end of the day, which is what most enterprise stuff is.
Cool. And so, given games are really exciting, do you have a particularly memorable project or even just an experience from your game dev journey?
Oh, lots and lots. I mean, for me, the most exciting ones were probably working on the MMOs, because they had hundreds of thousands of active players, and you get to go in there, add things, and then like actively just pop stuff up and play with the players and see all of the excitement. Plus, it was the thing that I loved to play the most. Like thousands of days of played time on EverQuest and World of Warcraft and stuff. It's an addiction problem that I definitely had and have gotten over, because I ended up having kids. It kind of kills that. But yeah, those were, I think, the most exciting for me, was working on those things. That, and then the other thing that really kind of stood out was when virtual reality came out again with the Vives and the Oculus. Building those games was really a blast, because it was this fun, fast, iterative process where you would take something like an idea, and within a week you've got a game, and then within a month you could probably have it done, out, and launched. And it's because of the scope of the devices, you couldn't have a huge scoped game anyway, and what people were expecting was a good 5 to 10 minute experience. It was easy to put into there, and the marketplace was fresh and open. And I always recommend to people, if you see a new marketplace that's opening up, take a look at it and see if you can jump in on it early, because if you can be one of the launch titles, you've got automatic sales. Like it's easy automatic sales, and the barrier to entry is much lower when things start out, and then you can kind of become an expert at it and get good at it from the beginning. So you see a new device, like right now, I'd say it's the AVP is probably the best one to as a new device, but it's kind of on the higher end price range. But yeah, I think things like that, like if you launch an AVP game right now and it's any kind of decent, there's not a lot of competition. They're getting, I think, one game a day compared to the Oculus or Steam that are getting hundreds or at least dozens.
What device are you talking about?
The Apple Vision Pro.
Apple Vision Pro.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, their new VR headset, and it's there's not enough adoption right now to get big companies excited about it. So everybody that's working on it is basically like a small, 3 to 5 person indie at most, or a lot of solo developers. And when the iPhone came out, I mean, I knew a guy that made like $1 million off a little fish pond that you clicked, and all it did was do ripple waves, because it was the first one there, and it was $1, and you go buy it and you click it. So if you can get in on those early on, it's a good way to make money and kind of make a name for yourself in that field or that device. I definitely recommend it.
Awesome. So could you share maybe some insights or experiences that you've had with different tools and technologies in game development, maybe especially as they pertain to Unity?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think it's good to talk about the other ones too, because you've got your enemy shirt on right there, right? The tools are super important, and I feel like it's important to make use of them and kind of know what all is out there. Unreal, great engine, used it a shitload. That was all of my Sony stuff was pretty much in Unreal and a little bit of custom stuff. Unity is great, especially for new device stuff. The reason that I switched over to Unity was because when the iPhone came out, they were the only one that had iPhone support for like a year and a half. They were the first ones, made it an obvious no-brainer, went right into it. I think they're still the only ones with AVP support. They might have added it in Unreal recently.
I've only seen Unreal devs hack together Unreal projects onto AVP. It is not officially supported yet.
Yeah. That's where they always come ahead on those new devices. I feel like that's where they try to push and lead. But for tools, another one that I really love and highly recommend is having a good editor. I got my JetBrains Rider socks on right now. They give them to me at GDC, and I love it. I think having a good code editor and understanding your code editor well is extremely important, and it's really important to try out multiple too. If you've only used one or two and you're kind of stuck on those, I highly recommend you go try out 2 2 or 3 other ones and just kind of see what they're like. But don't do it for just a day. Like, for example, with Writer, I had a friend who told me I should use it for 2.5 years before I gave it a try. He kept telling me over and over and over, and then I was like, fine, I'll try it. I'll give it 1 month, and then if I don't like it, I'll switch back. I forced myself to use it. Within a week, I was like, okay, there's no way I'm ever switching back. It's just amazing. It's so much faster. Everything is working drastically better. And I try to remind myself of that all the time when I'm evaluating the tools that I'm using and just going to look and see what else is out there. Right now, my main things are Unity, JetBrains, Writer, ChatGPT, although I generally use JetBrains AI for coding stuff now because I feel like it's a little bit better. And then on the tools, other than that, I think it's important to loosely understand that you can make your own tools. Like, one of the first things I did, like I said, was doing tools development for MMOs and just building out stuff that puts the content in, and just realizing that it's not very difficult to start adding in your own tools and your own tooling to speed things up sometimes is really helpful. The thing you got to watch out for, though, is if you're spending more time creating a tool than you would actually save from using it. So I have this nice little chart. It's up on my wall that shows an amount of time spent automating a process and the amount of time it saves, and gives you a nice little graph of if this process is something I do 30 times a month and it takes me 5 minutes, I can spend like 3 hours optimizing, or I've got the chart up there, so I don't even have to think about it, right? I can just look and see what can be optimized away and automated, and try to do that when it makes sense, but not go crazy. Again, the point there was just making your own tools super helpful as well. There was one other tool I was going to recommend. What was it? Oh, if you do use Unity, Odin Inspector.
Yes.
Great tool. I highly recommend it, and it makes it so that you don't have to do any code to write your own custom editors. You want to go make like an item editor or a whatever other editor, you put in attributes and it's there for you automatically. And they have as of I think last month, it's free for anybody with an education email. So you can get it from their education program, and it's just totally free to add in. Highly recommend that one. I use that on pretty much all of my projects.
Awesome.
At least all the ones that aren't too big where it causes problems.
Yeah, agreed. I've really enjoyed Odin Inspector when I've used it. You did mention one of those dangerous acronyms, GPT. I'm wondering, do you have an opinion on AI and how it could change gaming or technology as a whole?
Oh, yeah. I think everybody probably does. I feel like it's one of those things that's going to change stuff. It already is changing things, and you can either accept it or be in denial about it. I know some people that I know that are very in denial about it. Most of them, though, have kind of grown to accept the fact that AI is there for coding. It's making some things drastically easier, and eventually it's probably going to replace typing and coding. Give it enough time, you'll be able to talk to it, tell it what you want, and the code will be there. We already have no-code tools for designers to make all kinds of applications and stuff, and I'm sure long-term that's kind of where it's going to go. I still feel like there's a good 10 or 20 years to write code, though, and I'm kind of optimistic about that, so got enough time to at least go through one career. But I do feel like it's really important to start paying attention to the AI tools that are out there and understanding how they work and use them at least a little bit. It's going to take over coding. It's already starting to take over a lot of stuff in the art side. 2D stuff is pretty much mostly solved, and then 3D stuff is getting there. I know a couple guys that are working on 3D model generation with animations that works really well. That was a big focus at GDC too. There were a lot of AI companies doing models, animations, and even reskinning and texturing stuff. And give it 3 to 4 years, and it's just going to be type in what model you want, and you have that model. It's animated and runs around. So it is probably not a great time to become a 3D artist, but if you are, then take advantage of it now before the AI stuff kills that.
Yeah, and I like how you reframed that, creation doesn't just stop because AI is involved. You still have the human input, the person at the end of the day writing those rules for that game, making sure the model gives you the output that you need, which is all great stuff. But yeah, there's certainly still lots of code that needs to be written. And so a lot of developers, not just game developers, but especially game developers, have a steep learning curve that they need to overcome to get professional and build their own products, build their own games. Do you have any advice for someone who's just starting out in this field?
Ooh, yeah, make games. So just start by writing code and making things work, and not worrying too much about how it all works and the lower level details. I feel like at the beginning, it's really important to just get in there and understand that you can move things around, you can adjust things, you can start to map data to things that you see on the screen, and you do that kind of instinctively just by making a little game. You make a little guy that runs around and shoots stuff, then you make some enemies, and then you go, oh, I want to make a different kind of enemy. Start to think about those processes, and I feel like if you do it in the context of actually building a game, and building one that's small enough scope so that it's like, maybe 3 months at most. Sometimes those will grow up to like 6 months, but try to keep it small scoped and just go through that process of building it and then finding the problems and solving them. Because that's what I've seen people learn best from, is like they actually run into the problem, they have to figure out the solution to it, and then they solve it. And if you can do that, this stuff comes a lot quicker. You find the solutions a lot better. And I feel like you just learn quicker and become a better developer. After you kind of get a little bit comfortable is when I start to dive into the deeper stuff, start looking at different design patterns, how stuff's actually laid out in memory, and how computers and all that kind of work at the lower level. But I feel like that motivational part of just getting in there, finding problems, fixing them, or finding like, hey, I want to make 3 different enemies. How do I do that? What's the process for that? And then figuring out how you can set up some inheritance or set up data structures to just set up those stats, and kind of going through that process is what I usually recommend. And it's also just keeps them going, because they can get a game, build a game, have it out in like a week and show it to friends. That's a hugely motivating thing. And once you see that you can just make something, push it out there, or put it onto a VR headset, right? That's not very difficult. You put it on there, you show people, and they're like, oh, this is awesome. I do feel like it's great to put something onto a phone too, because it's always difficult to get some friend or family member to go put it on a headset, but easy to hand them a phone and be like, hey, check this out, and they'll play it for a few minutes and have fun with it. Keep it simple.
Awesome. So you've worked on a lot of different projects, both professionally and kind of your own projects. Do you have any golden rules or best practices for when you're developing your own prototypes or your own ideas?
Oh, yeah. Probably quite a few. When I think about it, rule number 1 is don't worry about performance at the beginning. Like, I don't worry about that at all until the thing is working. Once I figure out what the problem is, the thing that I'm working on, the system that I want to add in, I will add it in the way that looks and feels the easiest and cleanest to work with, and then take a look at it, step back, evaluate it, and say, okay, does this need to be faster? Is it fast enough? Is this something that's going to actually run regularly, or is this something that's just going to run one time or on a very rare off occasion, and it still only takes a couple milliseconds? So don't worry too much about performance until things are working, is I'd say one of the number one things. When it comes to building a bigger architecture, totally opposite. So if you want to build a big game and you're not building your own small prototype, then you need to start thinking about from the beginning how you're going to design it to fit into the specs of whatever thing that you're trying to target. But when you're starting out and you're kind of in this beginner phase, I would say ignore that completely and just get to the point where things are working, easy to understand. And number 2, use good names for stuff. It's probably the best thing that will make your code easier for you to understand and for you to debug and figure out later. If you name your variables A, B, C, or A1, A2, A3, and your method do thing, then it's going to be much more difficult next week when you're trying to figure out what that was, what did do thing do, and you have to go in and look at that code. So if you name methods and variables for exactly what they are or exactly what they do, then it will drastically improve your code. It's one of the biggest things you'll see between like a very obvious like junior to senior developer thing. If you see code and you see variables named A1, A2, A3, it's instant tell that, okay, it's probably a new programmer that hasn't had a lot of experience and hasn't had to go back and debug things and figure out, read code that they've written in the past, right? So very important. And it also tells you when that happens, if you end up with a method that has a very long name that looks like a sentence, it's a good indicator that maybe that should be broken up and maybe it could be split out into multiple different things. Maybe it's doing a little bit too much. Sometimes you're just bad at naming, you've got to practice. But get really comfortable with renaming things. So Control R is the hotkey for me, or F2, some people. I use it all the time. I rename stuff constantly, rename files, classes, and everything else to make sure that the name actually matches with what it does. Because if the name is off from what it does at all, then it needs to be fixed so that it matches. And I do that in place of comments for the most part. Generally don't like putting comments in code because they're usually just there to solve the problem of not understanding what the code does because things are named badly. Comments I save for a very specific use when I want to explain why I've done something that wouldn't be obvious. So if I'm, calculating a percentage, no comments. But if I'm doing something weird with some embedded system or some library that has some weird, strange requirements, I'll always put a comment up there of why we're doing these weird things in the way that we're doing them. Or if it's something that's been broken by somebody else in the past or by me and been a bug, often I'll put a comment up there about changing this to this thing causes this bug, so don't do it, and this is the reason why, giving some indication of why it's doing it. But most of the time, I feel like when you need comments for something, it's because something bad is being done and you have to explain why you're doing the bad thing, which sometimes you have to do, right? Sometimes you just have to do the bad thing, but ideally you try to get away from them. So those are, I think, 3 of my main things. And the 4th would probably just be continually, constantly learning. You've got to be just reading, watching stuff. I mean, I don't watch as many YouTube videos as I do read articles just because I'm always talking on YouTube and I feel weird watching other people talk. And I just want to speed them up. But reading through blog posts, reading through documentation, and just looking at kind of the new stuff, keeping an eye on what's out there. And I also really like to learn by just going to meetups and listening to podcasts. So going to things where I see new stuff being presented and shown off, or in podcasts I'll often hear people come on talking about new cool stuff that they did, new tech, or weird stuff they did, like I was telling Clarence about the family planning, this is family scrum stuff. I listened to a podcast on that and started having my kids do planning poker for their weekly activities and stuff. They all hated it, but it was a lot of fun. I think that it's important to learn stuff and just try it out and see what works and see what doesn't.
Yeah. So, obviously you've got a family. I think game development can be really demanding, and I've seen a lot of people, both indie and professional, burn out of this industry. I'm wondering, do you have any tips or advice on how to stay motivated and inspired in this dynamic, creative field?
Sure. So if you're in indie, getting stuff out in front of people often and early is super important because it's the thing that's going to keep you motivated and let you know if you're on the right track or if you're just doing something that nobody's going to care about or like. But when you're in the AAA industry or even in the smaller game industry, it's not as big of an issue as people kind of make it sound. The burnout stuff and the layoffs and all of the things that happen, especially if you're on the engineering side. So if you're a programmer, it's usually nobody really wants to overwork you because they know that causes problems, and usually you've got a reasonable idea of how long things are going to take. They always underestimate, so you just have to plan, expect to, what I would always do and everybody would always do is estimate about 50% longer because they were going to add stuff in the middle of it and you just knew that, hey, whatever this task was, it's this task plus 50% more from the designers that it's going to come eventually. So you have to kind of be ready for that. But the people that would generally burn out in the game dev industry, from my experience, were artists and designers. So artists and designers, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of pressure on them, and it's kind of a struggle. I feel like for programmers, it was less of an issue. I knew some programmers that would work crazy hours, but it was because they were addicted and loved it. And I feel like a lot of the designers are the same way. You'll tell them to go home, tell them not to work, and then they'll still work 14 hours a day. You can't stop them because it's a passion thing, which is one of the things you almost never see at enterprise. You very rarely see people take home their web project and keep working on it unless it's something that's using some new tech that they're really excited about. With games, you see it pretty much all the time. Just like, hey, they're constantly logged in, constantly working on stuff. And it was the same for me when I started. I would go in, I mentioned I was there for 3 weeks, but I would go in for 9 hours and work, and then I would go home, talk to my wife for a little while because she was still up in Washington. And I would talk to her, and then I would get right back to coding and start putting in more stuff. I'm like, this is so fun. I'm loving it. Like, it's an addiction, but it is balanceable. I wouldn't worry about it. It's not any worse than enterprise stuff. And with video games, I've never had people want me to jump on midnight calls and with other places. Our QA departments were all across the country, so regular like meetings at 1 a.m. to sit there and do nothing.
That leads me to a good question. When you were working professionally, either as a software developer or a game developer, either one, can you run through kind of like what the workday was like?
Yeah. So with enterprise stuff, it was typically come in early, like 9 in the morning, check email, go through like the first half hour to an hour was reading and replying to emails, usually just kind of random dumb questions. Sometimes it'd be something important, but most of the time it wasn't. It would be reading through these long chains to try to figure out if there's anything I need to pay attention to. And then looking at, it would be one of two things, either looking through our bug tracking software or our feature software and seeing what needed to be done next and just going and knocking out a bunch of tickets. Like I said, with Qualcomm, it was super easy to just get in there and like, here's a giant list of stuff and go fix them all really, really fast because they had a huge backlog of problems and very little engineering time. So like, okay, just jump in there. And then with games, it's with Qualcomm or with enterprise stuff in general, not just Qualcomm, there are also lots of meetings. I end up with lots of just meetings with tons of people to find out statuses on stuff and other things. With games, there were quite a few, there were like stand-up meetings in most places that would have like a 15-20 minute stand-up, go through stuff, maybe like a once a week or bi-weekly meeting, but the rest of it would just be talking to game designers and working on a bigger, longer feature and bigger kind of fun functionality. So you go, hey, we're going to do this update and we're going to put in these 4 things, and then whoever's in charge of that project would either dole those things out or usually take volunteers. So who wants this? And if somebody really was interested in building that system, like I remember John really wanted to do flying mounts. So flying mounts came up. He's like, me please. And he spent the next 2 months just writing flying mount code so that people could fly around and building that stuff out, and then working constantly with designers. So when you're doing game stuff, there's usually game designers that are putting in the content and you're interacting with them all the time and basically making what they want reality. So they're telling you, hey, this is the game, and you're saying, okay, well, let's make this vision of your game into a thing that actually works and takes inputs and shows what you want it to show. So that's why it's more fun too, because you get that fast interaction right away with the designer, and they're like, oh, this is awesome, this is great, this is exactly what I wanted, and they're like, oh, here, let me do this, it's even better, and then they get thrilled. They're like, oh, this is even better than I ever could have thought. Like, and then they put it in the game and the players love it, and it's a lot of fun. So with enterprise, they're like, this could be a little bit faster.
Do you have a piece of feedback that you got from a player of one of your games that always makes you smile, or just, is a funny story to share?
Not a particular one, because I've talked to a bunch, but the ones that really, I think, impacted me the most are the ones that I've met from playing MMOs. The ones that were like hardcore players of the games I was working on, especially the ones that like met their wife while they were playing the game, or they met a lot of their friends. A lot of my closest friends are literally from playing EverQuest. Like, they're guys that I played EverQuest with when we were like 15, and we still talk, still hang out all the time, and it's crazy stuff. So it's more the social stuff that really stood out. The other games, like, it's fun and all, but nobody gets super excited because nobody met their wife playing my baseball game or anything.
But certainly one wife was entertained at least. So you mentioned social. So can you speak to the importance of community and networking in the game dev industry, and maybe share how it has impacted your career?
Oh, I think it's the most important thing. If you want a game dev job, even a software job, but game dev specifically, because it's a smaller industry, having connections is the easiest way to get in. I would never just recommend going out and applying for a job. Go out and talk to people there. Find a place that you're interested in and talk to people who work there. Reach out to them online. But before you do that, go to things like meetups, local events, and stuff like that. Everybody that I've ever known that needed a job and started regularly going to meetups is able to find something within like a month or two. It's really, really common. And maybe it's different here. I don't honestly know the landscape of the area, but when I go to meetups in like San Diego area, Orange County area, there are flyers everywhere with all the hiring. Everybody's trying to get jobs, and there are recruiters that pay for the food and stuff just so they can stand up and tell everybody about the job openings that they have and try to get people in there. Doing that, super important. If you can't do it as much in person, doing it online is the next best thing. I feel like in person is obviously better because you get that just real personal direct connection, and it makes it a lot easier to kind of communicate. But if you can't do that, then going online and doing that stuff is super helpful as well. Or just going to traveling to some of the bigger events, especially the ones that are lower price. If you go to GDC, just get like the Expo Hall pass, the $300 pass, the cheap one, and go network and talk to people. That kind of stuff makes by far the biggest difference. Everybody that I know that is in the game industry pretty much has gotten jobs through other people they know, and it's constantly they're trying to cross recruit. So I went to Disneyland like 3 weeks ago with a bunch of game devs. They're all trying to recruit each other to come work with them, right? They're like, oh no, you should come here. No, you should come here. And it's just it's that kind of environment. So if you start to talk to them, they will tell you about the jobs. And nobody's going to know more about game dev jobs than other game devs. And same with just engineering jobs and enterprise jobs. The same kind of thing. You learn it, and you'll find out about those positions from the people that work there long before they post it online and start searching publicly. So it's much better to just get in that way. And that's what I would recommend. I think the networking is, like I said, by far the most important. It's probably more important than your actual coding skills is your networking skills, realistically, especially when you're starting out, because your coding skills aren't going to be that amazing to really impress people, but your ability to just talk to people and show them that, hey, I'm going to be fun to work with, I'm not going to be a dick the whole time, and it's going to be nice, I'll be able to contribute and help, really goes a long way. And then just getting the insight from people want to work with their friends, right? Like, yeah. You got a job at your company, you got a friend that can do the job, you're like, oh, hey, what about my buddy instead?
Yeah. Can you speak to some of the culture of the game industry and kind of maybe answer if you have any experiences or good tips for making friends at game conferences or things like that?
Oh, yeah. So game industry people are generally all game players. Almost all of them are. Now, I have run into a couple artists who don't really play games. They just really like to draw and like to make art, and games are the place that they can do it. But for the most part, you talk to a programmer, especially a game designer, they're game addicts. They're the people that are constantly playing all kinds of different stuff and want to try and build their own thing. So the people that you get there are almost always excited about their job, and they're happy about it. They love what they do, and they really like it. Where it's all like an enterprise, like I said, it's mostly just, it's a paycheck, right? They go in, they're like, hey, sometimes it's a paycheck, or it's a paycheck plus a promotion path that they're looking at. But most of the people, I never met anybody working in enterprise stuff that wasn't like a director that loved their job. Like, if they're a director or a senior manager, yeah, I love this place. But the rest of them are like, oh, it's okay, it's nice, it's stable. The game places, the people are just really excited to be there. It's a lot of fun. There was more to that question, though. What was the other part?
Do you have any good tips for making friends at game dev events?
Yeah, talk about the games that they're working on and the games that they're playing. So one of the things I often do when I meet new people at game events, really easy icebreaker, just ask them what they're actually working on. Start to talk about it and see what it is. A lot of the times they got really interesting projects, and it's fun to kind of just discuss what they're doing and see what they're building and kind of learn from it. And you might have some overlapping interests and experience too. But if you're working with them, there are also going to be lots of events. one of the things that I started doing early on when I was at Sony was going to play Magic. So we'd go play the card game. It was at the CEO's house. We'd just go over there and play. I got invited in and was like, hell yeah, I'm going to go play Magic. So we went and played, and it became like a regular thing. We just go every week. Also that's how I got my Qualcomm job. I was just sitting there, and one of the guys was a director at Qualcomm, said, hey, you want to come work at Qualcomm? I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, it seemed pretty cool. So it's it's definitely important. Just go out, hang out with them. When they invite you to go out to dinner afterwards or to a movie, even if it's a stupid movie you don't want to go see, just go hang out and be friendly and chill and make it a fun experience. Yeah.
So I'm going to steal one of your questions there. What are you up to? What are you doing today?
Now I mostly just do YouTube stuff and teach online, teach courses. I got that game.courses site, teach like beginner and advanced stuff, and then occasionally do a little bit of contracting stuff here and there, but primarily just the teaching. It's a lot of fun. Get to show people how to make games, get to see the games that they make, get to talk to Unity and get a lot of inside info from them all the time, which is great.
Cool. Yeah. So you have a pretty close relationship with Unity because you've been teaching Unity game development for quite a while. And as a developer, you've messed around with a lot of engines, Unreal and various technology. You've worked on MMOs. You have a really good understanding of the industry. What direction do you think Unity itself as an engine is heading?
That's a tough one. I'm still trying to kind of figure that out, and I know a little bit of stuff I can't say, so trying to figure that out and not say anything I'm not allowed to say. But it seems to me that they're working on kind of revitalizing the engine into a place that's a little bit more opinionated and a little bit more like Unreal, so that it's kind of game first. I know that they spent a lot of time working on enterprise applications and for visualization stuff for movies and stuff, which all ended up just getting sold off and pushed over to Unreal. So I think that they're kind of moving away from that and moving into games first again like they used to be, which I think is nice. It's going to be an interesting push, but they've got some cool stuff going on that I can't talk about yet too, that we'll talk about next time, I guess.
Very exciting, yeah. Always cool to hear. There was some Unity news that went public yesterday. The CEO, the interim CEO, moved to a director position, and they brought in Matthew Bromberg, an ex-Zynga executive, to fulfill that CEO role. Have you heard that news, and do you have any insight for us around it?
Yeah, so I saw the posts yesterday. I was looking in the chats with all the other YouTubers and stuff, and there's certainly some concern, right? Because largely just because of the past history, the titles, EA, Zynga, BlackRock, and all these other things that were on there, people were concerned. But I honestly really wonder how much of it is the CEO making the decisions versus all the executives underneath it and the CEO just kind of keeping that in line. I don't really know how much of a change it's going to make, if it's going to be kind of the same, if things are going to stay the same or drastically change. I know that a lot of people were lightly concerned and freaking out and expecting a little bit of a backlash on Twitter and stuff, but I felt like until we see what they actually do, there's no real point in getting upset, because just because somebody works somewhere doesn't mean that they imbue all those ideals of all the things that you don't like about that place, right?
I don't think a human, an individual is ever one-to-one with their employer, and certainly in a leadership position like that, you don't always bring the values from your previous organizations in. But I'm hopeful that someone with that experience who worked at Zynga can bring a lot of that same sort of culture, leadership, good energy over to Unity, because I think Unity does need it.
Yeah, and I feel like a little bit more on him. I think from what I understand, his time at EA was working with the BioWare stuff too, which is promising, because it's more of the types of games that they'd like to see built in Unity. So if you got industry experience there, and Zynga is obviously tons of Unity stuff.
Yeah. Do you have an opinion on the Unity monetization drama that went on last year with the new revenue base, or the new revenue model?
Yeah. So I feel like it was largely a mistake in messaging stuff that they did, because they freaked a bunch of people out by not telling them that they had already planned a 2.5% cap beforehand. So like before that stuff went out, it was really obvious. Like I knew that there was a cap on it. I didn't know what the cap was, but I knew there was a cap. They didn't mention it at all. And then after it came out, we talked about it. They're like, yeah, it's 2.5% cap. It's like, why is that not in there? I felt like that was the biggest problem that they had. It was also kind of a big shock because it was like, hey, this is coming for the thing that's already out now. I think that it should have been something that was announced like a year before when 2022 came out and said, hey, when 2023 comes out, we're going to go with this new plan. It'll have a 2.5% cap, but it'll probably be lower than that. This is what we're doing. I don't feel like it was messaged well at all. And I saw the stuff before it went out, and I told them, hey, this is going to go bad. But by the time we saw it and gave feedback, it was already locked down, and it felt kind of like it had gone through this corporate decision-making process, and things had been kind of stamped, and then it was just locked to go, and it had to go on a certain date without all the info. But I felt like it was horrible for Unity, and it was a very, very bad thing, and it could have been avoided. I also feel like Godot is horrible for Unity too.
Yeah.
Godot is the big elephant in the room right now.
Well, and you've seen Brackeys recently endorsed Godot, which is really cool. I think having an open source alternative in the ecosystem only drives Unreal and Unity, the big players, to further innovate and make sure their product stands out from what's available for free. So given, you've been following Unity for a long time, you have a close relationship with them, how do you kind of track evolution of gaming technology and new techniques in lighting, things like that? What do you do to keep abreast of innovations in this industry?
Constantly reading. So it's a lot of random blog posts and Twitter. It's weird. I know a lot of people hate Twitter now, but I actually like it more now because before when I would look at Twitter, it was always a bunch of political crap and other shit that I didn't really care about. Now when I look at it, all I see is game dev stuff. It's only the people that I'm following, and it's all game devs, and it's great. It's like a really good source of seeing new kind of news and info that's coming out, new big announcements, because somebody will retweet it. As long as you can avoid all the other crap on there, like just follow game dev stuff, and you get really useful news and info that way. The other thing that I do is I host a weekly podcast where I talk to other game developers, and they're constantly teaching me new stuff and showing me new stuff. So if something comes out, something new in Unity, something that's terrible, something awesome in Unreal or whatever, somebody is going to have an opinion about it. Somebody is going to bring it up. And we usually talk for a few minutes before we go live and then just get into the discussions. And that's just on my YouTube channel or on Spotify too. We just blab about that, whatever random game dev stuff. And I made it as literally a thing to keep me engaged and talking to people. That was the whole reason that I did it. Was I felt like I'm not going out enough. It was right around COVID was going on. I was like, what if I just do like a weekly show and I'll just have friends come on and we'll just bullshit like Joe Rogan about game dev stuff, and we just talk about random game dev things and don't worry too much about it, and it keeps us just growing stuff. And meetups are a good place for that too, but there's a lot more work going to a meetup than just listening to random podcasts.
Yeah, I have to echo that. I think there's too many articles, too many blog posts, too many people working on new things for any individual to keep track of it all. So your best bet is to talk with other developers and learn what they found and what they think is cool. And the more of those conversations you have, the more understanding you'll have of, okay, this is the new buzzing technology. This is the thing that this one person identified that no one else has. So I definitely think conversation, sort of, community is the way to go there. So cool. I got maybe just one or two questions before we go into Q&A. So, game industry, we saw its roots kind of start in just like basic computer simulation to kind of how you mentioned government-funded projects to, hey, make a video game, those sort of things. And game development has played a really huge role. Now we're even seeing surgery in XR, a technology that started and stemmed off of games. So kind of what role do you see game development playing in the broader landscape of technology and entertainment, especially now, that we see the rise of AI and all of these really, accelerating technologies, Web3 and all?
I think that it kind of already has started taking over the entertainment industry, not just the games, but like the film and video and all that stuff. A lot of it's being done in Unreal right now, some a little bit in Unity, but I think mostly in Unreal. And those skills that you get from doing game development or just doing general programming typically apply. So the same stuff that you're doing in making a game, very similar to the stuff that you're doing in making a movie and other stuff. It's a little bit different. Some parts a little bit easier, some parts a little bit more complicated. But in general, it's kind of a straight transition. If you want to get into film stuff and you've got Unreal experience, it's a huge, huge boost. If you want to get into like mentioning medical stuff or industrial augmented reality things, Unity is kind of kicking ass right there. There are lots of startups and bigger companies that do that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's the case for anything that needs like real-time visualization. Anything that benefits from that usually benefits from being built in a game engine, because anything that you could build for a mobile device or a tablet or whatever, you could build it natively, or you can use one of these engines and start to get a lot of extra power. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. You're building a really simple text app, it doesn't make sense, and it just kill performance for no reason. But if there's benefits from adding flashy particles, adding cool visualizations, maybe you had a random, regular page and you want to make it super cool, game engines are a great way for that. But I think more in the industrial side, there's a lot of good job opportunities. I mean, for every VR game dev job, there are probably 5 or 6 VR enterprise jobs. And I see those posted all the time. Again, I don't know how strong it is out here, but like on the West Coast, there's a ridiculous number of VR and XR jobs always posted, always online. And there are probably lots of remote ones as well.
Yeah, certainly. And I definitely agree that, it really, there's so much of it that just isn't games, but are stemming from the same skills and the same innovators. I think a few different people on the Anderson Horowitz side, but Andrew Chen specifically has identified that, hey, the phone is going to go away. Eventually we'll have some sort of AR device that replaces this thing. And a lot of the technology that would drive that is real-time 3D. And so we need real-time 3D developers, which currently work on games, to build that new wave of UX and software applications that's going to come with the future of tech. But really, really awesome stuff. I think it's such a unique, really cool opportunity to get someone like yourself who's a creative technologist, who specializes in games, and also, puts it into plain English, helps people learn how to do this themselves, and, tackle the complexity of building a full real-time 3D thing. It's really, really cool. So I want to open up the Q&A session for questions from the crowd, but I have a personal question I want to ask you first. Can you tell us what your favorite game object you've created ever in Unity is?
Probably just a game manager or a player. I don't know. Oh. I don't have a good one.
No worries. Game manager is always fun. That's usually the first game object I'll go and make in any game.
I almost always start with a character. I got a character, and then eventually I add a player that controls that character, and then I add the game manager once something needs to change state. Okay.
Cool. I like that. Very iterative process. All right, let's do questions from the crowd. I'll walk around with the mic, and just raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll come find you. Already got one hand up, so I'm going to come to you first.
Hey, if you were just learning to code again and had access to AI at the point it is today, do you think you'd still utilize it like you currently do, or
No.
would you be hesitant to not use it as a crutch?
I would definitely not use it. So the way that I use AI right now, just to clarify for everybody, is typically it's built into Writer. So I use the AI very similar to Copilot. And what I usually do is I will type a method name, and then there will be a gray chunk of code. And if that's exactly what I was going to type, which about 50% of the time it is, I hit tab, and then I continue on and just keep going. For actually asking it questions. I usually only do that if I'm working with some library that I haven't used lately or something else. Like the last time I did it was I asked it, can you write me a class to take data from this Google sheet and put it into these scriptable objects. Gave it the class, the scriptable objects, and it just wrote the code that I needed. I didn't have to go look up the Google API. It just worked, and it was 30 seconds. I had it up and running, pulling stuff from there. But generally, I would say if you're starting off and learning, it will confuse the living shit out of you, and you'll get lost, and you'll make all kinds of bad decisions and mistakes, because it's going to assume that you're doing things that you're not doing half the time, and it's going to try to put in this code, and if you don't know that that's wrong, then it's bad. But for time saving, that's the main thing I use it for. It's just like I type out a method name, and if your methods, again, it goes back to that really good naming. If your method is named really well, it's likely it's much more likely to figure out exactly what you wanted it to do based on your other variable names and stuff. If you do, hey, take damage, void take damage, and you already have a health and there's a damage amount coming in or something, it's going to write that code. And if you have a UI health bar thing in there, it's going to say, hey, update this health bar. And if you have a flash thing in there, it's going to try to write the code to flash it. It's going to generally try to figure that stuff out and kind of speed you up, which is what I like, because it just cuts it. What I found is it cuts down my typing by like 50% at least. So I just type it and hit tab, especially anything tedious or like repetition. Like I had to type something 3 or 4 of a thing. I type one and then I hit enter, and then it's got the next one there. I just hit enter and enter and enter.
Yeah, I find if you're using it in the wrong way, it'll cause you to type more. If you use it in the right way, it'll type less.
Yes, it's not a new developer tool that I would leave on by default or trust by default. Like, it's good to look at and kind of see the recommendations, but I wouldn't just auto add them like it, because it'll easily lead you down the wrong path.
Cool.
Hey, so I know you kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I was just kind of curious how the evolution of tech, you've been working in this industry for a long time. And I just wanted to know how your kind of perspective has changed as tech has changed. Like how you feel about all these new tools and kind of just what your thoughts are. Because, these weren't around, 10, 20 years ago. So I was just...
Oh, no, I'm mostly just jealous. Like, I wish this stuff had existed when I was a kid and I could just get in there and make games from day one. Like when I was a kid, I was able to make games, but I could do text games. I couldn't figure out how to do any rendering stuff. It was extremely complicated. I was 7 years old trying to figure out how to peek and poke stuff. But I could do little text games and keep track of a little bit of data, like do like a little space station thing where you buy ships and then your ships blow up, and no real logic to it. But nowadays, with the tools that are available, I feel like there's really no excuse for anybody that wants to make a game to not make a game. Now, if the game they want to make is some like World of Warcraft clone, there's an excuse. But if they want to make a reasonable game, the only thing really stopping you is the time. You've got to invest the time. You got to find the time and invest it. So if you have free time available, you no longer need $1 million to get an Unreal license to be able to actually try it. Like, it's so open and so free now that I think you just got to get in there and do it. I'm very, very jealous of the times and the tooling and stuff available. I feel like it's like a perfect time to be a game developer, because you can just get out there, you can make stuff day one, start putting out games, you can put them out on your own, and you can get in and start working with other friends and developers online, make cool stuff, or you can get into the industry. The industry is so much huger than it used to be too, and it's like grown 100x at least since the 2000s. It's big, it's giant, there's lots of opportunity. If you want a game dev job, I would go for it.
Yeah, and to further that, I don't think we've ever seen more readily available jobs in the industry. Yes, there's been lots of layoffs, but there's also been lots of refreshing of new studios, new jobs, and a huge amount of VC investment into games that didn't exist before. Literally almost $1 billion invested in games this year that wasn't happening before. It's really cool.
Still got a little time to apply for that A16Z speed run.
Yeah, you still got a little bit of time. If
you got like a week or
idea.
two left.
and then you'll move to LA and be working on games with some of the coolest studios. So yeah, I think we have yet to see the golden era of indie games. It's very much still in the works.
I know you touched on this a little bit earlier as well with the AI and programming, and you said about 20 years before it's really like a viable part. What are you thinking about? Because I have a few friends who've been working in the industry, and he's kind of one of his big fears, like AI starting to take programming jobs. Like, what are you thinking about that? When's that line going to be crossed? And what are your kind of, I guess, like, what the future do you think will looks like?
Yeah, my expectation there is that probably in the next 5 or so years, the demand is going to start shrinking. Right now, the demand for programmers is still relatively high. I feel like that's going to kind of shrink and just level out. I don't feel like it's going to dip below where it's at right now. They're probably just going to level out for another 15 or 20 years and then maybe slowly drop after that. But I think that's going to be at the point where you don't necessarily need to write code to make things, and you can just tell the computer, this is the thing that I want. And it may end up being in some system like Roblox, right, where you make a game in Roblox by talking to the AI and it creates the entire thing for you, and you go pick out the models that it's generated and stuff. I do feel like that's still quite a ways off, but eventually, I mean, if it can happen and you can do that, and nobody's going to go write 100,000 lines of code, they're going to say, hey, I want to just talk to this thing, and it just did it. So eventually, when it gets there, that'll happen. But I feel like there are going to be multiple iterations in between where people do little one-off things and systems where you can make apps or make games with AI. There's already ones where you do web pages, right? That was the obvious first one, generate a bunch of HTML. But there will be a bunch more of these interactive apps, I think, and interactive web pages coming, and then it'll turn into more interactive games. I know like Midjourney's already talking, they have this grand vision of just being able to generate an interactive game by typing in a single prompt, and they were talking about that recently. I still think it's a ways off. We've got plenty of time to actually write code, and even when it comes, it's going to be in little segments at first. It'll be this type of app or this little thing that you can do, and then it'll slowly morph and grow. And as long as the world doesn't fall apart in the next 20 years, I feel like the tech is just going to keep growing exponentially, and we'll get to that point where you just say what you want and it kind of does it.
Yeah, right now the problem is you can't just speak a game into existence, but once you can, then we'll have new problems, hopefully, to face.
All right, so this is more of a community development question. What elements in a game dev community do you think you would need to be like, yeah, that place is worth moving to? So I know like Austin is like the big one they talk about, but like if Tulsa were to grow it, what would you be like, oh yeah, this is what you guys need and I'd be willing to go here?
Events are a big one. So, I mean, obviously game dev industry jobs are good. Having events that are kind of game focused is another big one. Having they got South by Southwest, not really game event, but I know they've got a couple other things out there. And then in LA area, there's just ridiculous numbers of them. And same with like up in Seattle area, there's lots and lots of game dev just events to go to PAX and all that other stuff. I felt like those types of things, having like a big game dev event here once a year that was big and like drew people in, could be really helpful, and like not a huge investment type thing. That you just host a conference and make people pay to come there, like, and relatively cheap, I would assume. But yeah, it's things like that where people can have a reason to come together. Because meetups are good, but you still have to kind of be in the area to know about the meetup and go to it and attend it and stuff. So if you have bigger events, big one-off type things, or just like an annual event, a mini GDC, TDC, or whatever, something like that, I think could help. I mean, I'm obviously not an expert in that, but I think that something like that would be really helpful. And then just having obviously lots of game dev jobs. That's usually what does it. It's a couple companies come in, they have lots of jobs, and then more companies start to form off of those. Some of those people break off. Like at Sony, we had an Austin office, right? And that was one of the early offices out there that was doing game dev stuff. They were one of the first, and a lot of those people would slowly kind of split off. They would leave, and then they would go make their own company, or they would join up with other developers there, and join up with other people from other game companies there, and start to grow and form it. So, like, just having a couple there, especially if you can get a couple that have 50 to 100 employees that are just there, and then eventually, kind of coming in and out and then going to other places, because you get that a little bit of churn. If you got really small companies, it's hard to have that same kind of churn and then them kind of getting together. But like that, I think events would be really cool too, though.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so for entry-level developers who are trying to get into the games industry, obviously they need portfolio, resume, and those sorts of stuff, even though they do network, because the hiring person is typically not the friend. What would you recommend in terms of tips in terms of standing out so that they have a much better success of landing a job?
Okay, so for portfolio, I think the most important part is to only put forward the good stuff. Just put forward the best things that you've done, not every single thing that you've done. Don't grab every project that you've done and put it up there. Just take like the number one and two projects, put them up there in their best possible light, show them like the coolest things you've done on it, and really kind of highlight that, because if you show the bad stuff, they're just going to see that. They're just going to look at that, and it's not going to help you at all. So show the good stuff, focus on that, keep it pretty, and don't expect that people are going to read your code. So if you put stuff up on GitHub and make this whole giant thing, very, very, very few people are actually going to look at it and care when they're hiring you, because they just don't want to dig through your code. Unless it's like a small little sample that you've given them of something that's really cool, they don't want to go look at your project with all of your movement stuff and all your other random generic stuff. And if they find something bad in there they're looking through, they're like, oh, this is terrible. And it could just be some random like script that you copied off because it didn't matter at all and was just a throwaway thing. So I would say put your best foot forward there on the portfolio stuff, and make it nice, pretty, fancy. Have just a dedicated web page with your name or whatever that's the portfolio. And then I still feel like the networking part is going to be a much bigger impact, though, because having a portfolio helps great, especially if you're just blindly submitting a resume, because what we'll do is go through, look at them, and all the ones that have a portfolio link, we'll just click on it, go look at that first. If they have a playable game that we can go play that's like 30 seconds to a minute and it's fun and interesting, they get right to the top of the list. Right? It's like they got a fun, playable WebGL game that takes about a minute to play and is like a neat little twist on something, and it's polished and doesn't feel terrible. That will get you right to the top of the list. Go, okay, this person has actually built stuff. They finished it. They polished it up. They made the experience not suck. Inputs work. The buttons are actually mapped how they're supposed to be and all that stuff. Huge, huge bonus to set you aside. Having a really ugly portfolio just kind of push you down. Doesn't help at all. So have something pretty up there, and ideally something short, fun, and playable. Don't ever think that they're going to download your zip and run your executable, though. If you try to give them a thing, nobody's going to run it, because everybody's afraid there's a virus getting into their corporate network. So you've got to have it as a WebGL or Web GPU build. That's probably what I would focus on. Having just that fun, like 30-second to 1 minute playable experience, because that'll set you aside more than anything else on the portfolio.
Hi, my name is Chris Wright. I'm over here. Sorry about that. And okay, my question is, so how do you prepare for like a vlog for that week? Like, man, so what's your process on like just like doing a YouTube video, or like how do you prepare for it that week?
It's a good question. I've gone through a bunch of different processes. I used to write out a bunch of ideas. I would write them out on notepads, and then I would kind of whittle it down to the best ones, try to figure that out, and then I would plan it all out. I've changed over the years, and my new system is that in the morning I'll take a shower and just think about what's interesting that day, and then I'll go record it right after. Just go, it's like straight, go record it, and if it's interesting and it's good, if it's not, then I just won't record. And I'll just think like, okay, if there's something interesting happening or something interesting I'm working on that I can teach, then I'll just make a video out of that. It is really helpful if you have projects that you're working on too. That's why I'm like constantly working on games and stuff, because having a project to work on gives you problems, gives you things to look at, and gives you things to talk about. So I look at those as like, oh, hey, I just ran into this. I just solved it, and make a video about it. That's kind of how I started doing it, was just doing that kind of thing. I would find problems, and I would make a little blog post about them, and then eventually I was like, oh, blogging takes too damn long. Like, I could just record this and You know, and I had to get over my fear of speaking in public. But once I did that, I was like, oh, it's so much easier. Like, people watch it, and YouTube will just promote it and push it out there. I don't have to share my blog post or anything else. You know? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, if you got more questions about that stuff too, feel free to reach out. And if anybody's got questions about any of this stuff, my email is just my name at Gmail. So just first and last, just email me, and I try to reply as quick as possible. I got a little bit of a backlog right now, but I'm trying to catch up when I get home. Cool. Do we have other questions?
Yeah, so I was wondering, you stated for your portfolio you should only put like your best stuff. What would be some of the best stuff that you've developed that you would put on there?
Oh man, if I was doing it, I would probably focus on the AAA stuff that I've worked on, the MMOs like EverQuest, EverQuest 2, and Vanguard. Maybe put a little bit of PlanetSide stuff on there, and then I would maybe a little bit of VR stuff. And I would probably just put Steam links to some of the VR games so people could go grab them. Although with my current stuff, I would probably just post my YouTube because like it's even more like it shows all of the teaching and stuff. What's that? I don't anymore. I used to carry them around, and then I quit a long time ago.
Yeah,
but it's just my name at Gmail. It's just my first and last name, Jason Weimann, on YouTube and everywhere else. I got lucky, and when I was at Sony, they made us go grab our name on Twitter and everything that came out. As soon as it came out, they're like, go get your name before somebody steals it and starts impersonating you. So loosely active. I repost all the things that I think are fun, but I almost never make original posts.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll be dropping Jason's YouTube in our Slack channel as well. Any questions? Anyone else got a final one from Amir?
Hello, Jason. Thank you for your time today. This is more of, I guess, a kind of a marketing question or so, more or less on the YouTube side. I would like to ask you, how do you use social media as a tool to not only leverage yourself in negotiations, but in marketing in general?
For me, mostly what I do is occasionally talk to people on there, like some direct connections, but I'll just post links to my videos and stuff when I do it. Or if there's something that I find like really interesting, or like a poll that popped up or some question that I got, then I'll put those onto there. But I don't feel like I'm great at like the social media marketing stuff at all. I don't even have a TikTok account or a lot of that other stuff. I have like 7 Instagram posts, and they're mostly of me decorating my office. Like it's I'm pretty bad at that kind of stuff. I feel like for me it's like sticking to the one thing that I feel I'm kind of good at, which is just doing tutorial stuff, and teaching really helps a lot. And actually I was watching Alex Hormozy. I don't know if you guys seen him. He talks about business and weightlifting stuff. He's super jacked dude talking about YouTube stuff and teaching, and how focusing on the educational stuff is generally better, and I found that that's the case for me too. Like giving people what is useful for them or what they kind of like, and trying not to mix it up. If you do a bunch of educational stuff and then do a bunch of entertainment stuff, the audiences don't really mix, and people don't really like both things. So kind of finding a niche and like just focusing on that and getting down to the thing that's good. And like I said, with mine, I just focus on like Unity stuff, architecture stuff, and try to keep to mostly more intermediate to advanced topics, and then people subscribe to that. And I know other people just do like beginner stuff or fun entertainment stuff, and keeping to that. But it seems that sticking with a like single theme really, really helps. Finding a theme that works first, and then sticking with it once it works, once it's getting some traction. But again, I don't feel like I'm that good at it.
Awesome. Final check for questions. Okay, cool.
I wanted to mention one other thing real quick. On the enterprise stuff, so we were talking about games and building visual applications. Like one of the things that stood out that I didn't mention was like if you're into sports and entertainment type stuff, that's huge for Unity and Unreal stuff. All of those interactive experiences at the sports stadiums. Like my buddy did the one for the Super Bowl where they're doing all the interactions on the billboards and stuff. And they built that whole company around just doing stuff for sports teams. And there's a lot of those out there if you like, not just sports, but like any side industry, there's lots of museums. I see Unity and Unreal in every museum that I go to. There's some instance of something interactive, and it's using one of the two. And I usually spend a little bit of time screwing around with it to try to figure out what it was built. And I'm like, what's this built? And see if I can track it down. But those things are really cool, and I mean, if you're into it, like my buddy was not into football at all, so he didn't know who any of the people were, but his friend that was with him was having the time of his life, working on Super Bowl apps and talking to the players and stuff. So lots of cool opportunities there to do interesting other things, and if you see like something that you're really interested in, and they have some bit of interactive stuff, or maybe opportunity for interactive stuff, dive into it and see if you can do it, because getting those like museum contracts and stuff like that, very easy. Those are like, you can do that I've known people that couldn't code at all, got plenty of those contractors or those jobs, and then just contracted it out to somebody else. I even had a friend who had one, and he's like, I don't know how to do this, and spent like an hour, made his little app, and that finished his whole contract. So lots of cool little things like that, and those ones are usually really simple. It's like, hey, we got some fish, and you need to click on it, and it pops up a thing or something.
Yeah, and I think museums are a really interesting one because they're also really easy to suggest things to. If you want to find something that's more established for a project or a portfolio, you can go to a local museum or your favorite museum and ask them, hey, I want to curate an experience here. I'm an XR developer. This is what I do. Here's a quick demo. I'd love to make X and YZ experience for your museum. And they're pretty open to it. It's a really good way to get something that's maybe volunteer work or low contract, but give you that kind of foot in the door into the industry.
And I know they also post a lot of requests for just proposals on those things. Like they'll put them up online, and you just go basically apply. Go, hey, I'll do that one, and they have a budget. And they're not usually huge budgets, like $1,000 to $5,000, on a thing. But they're also projects that if you're experienced, you could probably knock out in a week, and if you're a junior, you could spend a month and build it and have a lot of fun and grow with it and make some money at the same time.
Definitely. Well, awesome. I got one final question for you before we bid you farewell. What's your favorite video game? What are you playing today?
Magic Arena. Yeah, I'm an addict, and I play multiple drafts a day whenever my wife's not looking. I'm just sitting there drafting, and whenever she sees my phone like this, she knows, and I just put my head down in shame.
What color? What's your favorite color?
Mostly blue.
Mostly blue.
Blue,
Okay. He's a card draw kind of
although
guy.
with the latest set, red.
Awesome.
Mostly drafts. I play a lot of Commander and then drafts. So the two of those. A card? Ooh.
Black Lotus.
No, it's fun, but it's kind of boring. Probably something like Grindstone or Painter Servant. Fun stuff. Like, what's that? Oh yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like ones that do crazy weird stuff. I built a whole deck of just alternate win conditions where no way to win by killing people, only by cards that say you win the game if some weird thing happened. Like I like doing those kinds of fun things, and then doing like themed tribal builds like changelings, dragons, zombies kind of stuff, and not too competitive, but super fun and themed. The latest one was dinosaurs. They made all those dinosaur secret layers, so I was like, well, got to get Jurassic Park deck set up now. So, and then one of them looks like my buddy Fabian, so it's perfect.
Excellent. Well, any closing remarks or notes of positivity for students or anecdotes about the industry you want to leave us with?
I would just say that if you want to get into game stuff, do it. Don't be afraid. Just get out there, start applying for things, start making little things, and make stuff that's small scoped so that you actually finish it. Don't create like big, giant, year-long projects that you're going to work on, because the likelihood that you'll finish it is really low, and you probably just get demoralized. And the likelihood that it's going to be good after a full year is pretty low too. You want to build a couple things, try out stuff, and then when you build, these 2 to 3 month games, if one of them is fun and starts to stick, and you see like, hey, I'm showing this to people and they actually keep wanting to play it more, then you start to build off of that. Don't like kind of dig down a rabbit hole. And also, if you're doing enterprise stuff, it's still fun. It's fun to like go out and see the new technology, learn about new tech, and find new ways to solve problems. So make sure that you keep it interesting and keep it constantly learning. It's the thing that keeps it from being boring. And one thing you definitely want to avoid is a problem that I've seen happen a lot, and I know this is super motivational. Don't get yourself stuck where you're doing the same job for like 10 years, where you're doing like literally fixing the same problems, working in the same code base, doing the exact same thing for a very long time. Because 10 years of experience working on one project with one thing is about the same as 1 year of experience. You have to get out there. You have to try out different things. If you're not growing in your own place, then you have to try out new places. I feel like it's really important to experience new things and grow and try out different stuff. So if you find that you're getting stagnant, you're not learning, you're not growing in what you're doing, start looking for other opportunities. It's much better to find a new job when you don't need it than when you're desperate and searching for it. So if you're constantly just out there looking around and seeing what's available, it's going to be a lot easier on you, and it'll help you a lot in the long run. Because I've known people, like I said, that worked in one place for 10 years and then suddenly that place is gone and they have a really, really hard time finding a new job because all of their experience is around like one specific application and one specific business use, and they really don't understand much more beyond that. So constantly be learning, even if you're not, going somewhere else, work on your own side projects. That's kind of the alternative. A lot of people that I know that stay in one place and stay really good also have like little projects that they're working on. They have side company things that they're doing and other kind of fun, interesting stuff that they're keeping themselves educated and learning constantly with, so that they become a good developer, right? Oh, and lastly, don't be afraid to show your code to other people. Just if they're a dick when you show it to them, show it to somebody else next time. Because some people are terrible and horrible at like reviewing code and giving feedback. But for the most part, 4 out of 5 people are going to be relatively positive and give you some positive things that you can do. Oh, I shouldn't say 4, probably like 2 out of 5. The other 2 out of 5 are going to have no idea what to recommend and just give you bad advice or no advice. And then 1 is going to be probably just a dick and tell you that your code's terrible and you should jump off a bridge and quit coding. But ignore that one and find the people that have good advice. It's really bad if you just never show your stuff, because then you don't understand and learn about the problems. One nice thing too, so I keep rambling, is with ChatGPT. Now you can use that as another code review source. So you can put it in your class. I'll do this sometimes, recommend it to people a lot. Put it in your class, say, hey, how would you recommend I fix this? What are some possible improvements to it? And you just paste in the code, and it will give you a ridiculous, unending list of things that you could do to make it better. And you can just have a little conversation with it and ask it about, why is this better? How does this stuff apply? I recommend that a lot. I have my 16-year-old do that a lot too. So when he's writing code now, if he has problems, I say, hey, ask ChatGPT first, and then see what it says, and then we'll talk about it, and then kind of discuss it more. But I feel like sharing your stuff with other people, super strong. If you can't do it, then ChatGPT is kind of the next best, or maybe like an early step. You share it and then say, hey, I ran this through ChatGPT and it's recommending this, this, and this. What do you think? And you just ask, your other friend that's maybe slightly more senior, or ideally super senior, get some good feedback. So yeah. Don't be afraid to share your stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, and I can echo that. Playtesting is so hugely important. You kind of have one idea of what you're building when it's just your perspective, then you put it in someone else's hands and they see it from totally flipped around the opposite way, and they can give you feedback about things that you weren't even aware of. So yeah, I highly recommend playtesting there, and ignore the haters. That 1 out of 5 doesn't matter too much. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming and speaking with us and sharing your insights. This was super insightful and a really fun conversation. We hope to have you again here in Tulsa sometime soon.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. So thanks for having me out here. And like I said, if anybody's got other questions that come up later, just shoot me an email. I'll reply and give you the best advice I got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And let's give Jason a big round of applause. Awesome. And go follow his YouTube channel. Great stuff. There we go. Excellent. Cool. Yeah, and I'll be dropping the link in Slack as well.
Yeah, if you guys got YouTube video requests, just send them over too. That's the other thing to do, like for ideas. If somebody asks for something in a comment or something else and seems reasonable and I can do it, I'll just do it. I'm like, oh, that's an easy idea, and I do it. And usually it ends up being popular too, because if somebody wants to know about it, then other people want to know about it too. So.
Excellent stuff. Well, Jason, thank you again, and we'll hopefully see you again sometime soon, certainly on YouTube. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think so as well. To be if you're just one person up there, so like
I can ramble.
I can tell you're really good up there.